Welcome to HarmonyTALK, a podcast about dreamers and doers. Here people from all walks of life tell us about their dreams and the moment they knew there was no turning back as they went from dreaming to doing. This podcast is sponsored by AM Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business started in 1920. My name is Greg Frigoletto, your very grateful host for this episode. Today I am joined by Mr. Ron Cey. To all of you that love Dodger Blue or might instead be a fan of the beloved Cubbies, and for those like me that closely follow Major League Baseball, Ron needs no introduction. For the rest of you, Ron is a former Major League Baseball player who played for the Los Angeles Dodgers, Chicago Cubs, and Oakland Athletics. He was a six-time All-Star, won a World Series with the Dodgers in 1981, and was World Series MVP. Ron, welcome to HarmonyTALK.
Thank you, Greg.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So, Ron, this is a podcast that looks to inspire by sharing great stories like yours that demonstrate that dreams can become a reality. In other words, dreamers become doers. Now, as you're aware, millions of kids growing up dream of becoming a Major League Baseball player. And for me as a kid, it was magical watching you as a Dodger play alongside the all-star infield of Steve Garvey, Davey Lopes, and Bill Russell. And then, of course, there were the matchups between your Dodgers and your arch rival of the day, the Big Red Machine, with guys like Pete Rose, Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan, George Foster, Griffey Sr. Watching that became something that truly, in my world, was out of this world. And truth be told, many kids like me with our Ron Cey mitts wanted nothing more than to be you, Ron Cey. So for you as a kid growing up in Tacoma, Washington, who was it that inspired you? And at what point did you realize that Major League Baseball could be a reality?
Well, my father, when I was about 5 or 6 years old, at least that's what I believe is the time frame, shoved me through the front doors of the boys club that I would spend a great deal of my young childhood at and play all the sports and gain all these friends and actually somehow become an employee of the boys club. I think I was there to open the doors and leaving sometimes late and locking the place up after I had cleaned it up and answered the phones and did all the registrations and everything else. I really felt a part of it. And it was probably around 8 or 9 years old that I had this epiphany. I think it's the legitimate only epiphany that I had, playing a game on the main field behind the boys club, Saturday morning, 10 a.m. game, beautiful, beautiful day, about 70 degrees. Up in Washington, you realize that it rains a lot, so we were happy to get this game in. And I remember walking to home plate and feeling so good about this. I said, God, wouldn't it be great if I could do this every day? And the epiphany opened, epiphany closed, but the dream did not. The dream continued on. And I turned down many fishing trips with my dad, family trips with my family to go play baseball. They were all very encouraging. I had a job with my dad in the summertime. I was going to work at 6 in the morning until 6 at night, and that was 6 out of the 7 days a week. When I had to play baseball, I went and practiced and played the games, but I spent a lot of time working for my dad. So from 12 to 18, I was doing one or the other, and it was a great learning process, although I feel like I missed a lot of my youth period there that I'd like to have been hanging out like the rest of the kids. But I made all the sacrifices. I knew it was going to be difficult. My first baseball idol, and still only to this day in that category, was Willie Mays. And we had the Tacoma Giants residing in Tacoma, the AAA franchise of the Giants in the Pacific Coast League. So I had front row seats for watching all the great players that went on and participated and became Hall of Famers with the San Francisco Giants. And Willie, of course, was already in the major leagues at that time because they came from Brooklyn West like the Dodgers did in 1958. And had an opportunity to go to an exhibition game and got to see him play. And that kind of solidified my Willie Mays thing. And that went full circle. Got to play against my idol, got to have a relationship with my idol, all of which is still one of the greatest memories I have about playing this game, is being able to have that dream become a reality that is now a dream again. But to be able to rub elbows and play with one of the greatest players in the history of the game, regardless of which area you're in, was a phenomenal thing for me to experience. I grew up being compared to Ron Santo when I was 14, 15 years old. I'm a mirror image, essentially, of Ron Santo. If you were to take our career statistics based on 162 games, you could take the names away and you would want to know which statistics are whose. And he is posthumously voted into the Hall of Fame. I was drafted out of high school in 1966. I had the Vietnam War staring me in the face. I had to make a decision, an easy one. It was either go to school and be protected or go to Vietnam. So I took my schooling, my education, my scholarship, signed 2 years later. The draft laws were different back then. I could sign after my sophomore year. I did. I went to the Dodgers, and eventually, to avoid the same thing that potentially was staring me in the face when I signed out of high school, I eventually had to go into the military and do my duty as a reservist. That took 2 parts of 2 years away from me, but I was still able to proceed. And my first opportunity to step into Major League Baseball came at the end of the season, 1971, after I'd had a breakout year in Spokane, where I hit 32 home runs, hit 331, and drove in 123 runs in like 130 games. Ironically, I got set back again, had to go back and do it all over again, but so did the rest of the nucleus of what was going to represent the Dodgers for all those years. So could have been there maybe a year and a half earlier than I was, but it all turned out very well. And I eventually got traded to the Chicago Cubs, got to become better friends with Ron Santo, who was working in the radio booth, and I had a terrific relationship with him. And so I touched some important bases with people that I was associated with early in my life. And when I was awarded the Washington State Minor League Player of the Year, which was an event held up in Seattle after the 1971 season, guess who presented me with that award? And it was none other than Ron Santo. And the comparisons are much greater than just the statistics.
So on a personal level, I have a feeling there's similarities. So, you talked about going into, playing Little League baseball and you started moving on from there. Like many kids, for me, my dream of being a baseball player faded quickly when I realized that couldn't happen. So for you, that sort of perpetuated where the dream was there and your ability must have been clear. So I'm sure, as you said, your parents encouraged you. So was it from an early age where you kind of thought, all right, this is where I'm heading? And you didn't really have a backup plan, or did you?
4 years into my career, we had a road trip that took us to New York. And there was a lady there with one of the national magazines that wanted to do an article on me. It was like overnight success. This was an article that started out getting background. And I mentioned that I had this childhood dream of becoming a Major League Baseball player. And she said, well, what would you have done if you hadn't played Major League Baseball? And I said, there was no other option. I was going to play Major League Baseball. And she said, oh, I'm sorry. Maybe you didn't understand me. And I said, maybe you didn't understand me. Look, I realized that I was very fortunate. The odds are so stacked against you. When you have these summer drafts that are coming up here pretty soon in June for the players who are eligible in this year, they're the top players in the country at this point in time, high school, junior college. They're the best available guys. 97% of those guys are going to go home unhappy. And it didn't bother me. I felt like, okay, what's next?
Now, did it come naturally, Ron, or did you have to work at it?
I'm 76 years old, so I've had a chance to go over my past quite a bit. When I was playing, baseball was first. And I loved playing football, and I was good at it. And I was good at basketball, and I loved playing it. So I played everything through high school. We had 3-year high schools back then. I was an all-star performer in every sport that I played in high school. I won 9 letters. Pretty much, they used to call me in articles in the newspapers, in our local newspapers, Mr. All Everything. And I was far from that, but it sounded nice. But regardless of how well I played in the other sports, I knew that baseball was the end result there. Certainly too short, wasn't skilled enough to be that kind of a basketball player. In high school, fine. Football, the same way. I was a top running back. I was actually, Street and Smith magazine had me listed as the #1 running back in the state of Washington in the 1966 high school season, of which I got hurt. So that took care of that dream. And I wasn't really that kind of a player either. There were other players, but I was good enough to be, I guess, in the mix.
You mentioned when you were playing football, you sustained an injury. And nowadays, what happens, Ron, is a lot of kids, and maybe even more so their parents, they make this decision where they're going to be a one sport athlete. And then they don't have the opportunities that you did to play multiple sports. What are your thoughts on the one sport athlete mentality that you so often see nowadays?
Well, my only hope is that you don't sustain injuries along the way that allow your body to grow in the manner that it should. They talk about pitching mostly is the concern. They don't like kids throwing breaking balls, as an example, at an early age, and they like to keep the pitch count down, which I totally understand. That would be one concern. The other is burnout. I don't want these kids to come to the ballpark every day and now at 11 years old, man, I wish I was at the park, or I wish I was swimming or whatever. Want it to be fresh, want it to be fun, want you to learn something. At that point in time, you're still trying to get past catching, throwing, and hitting. There's actually some thought to this game. And then that develops as to the higher ranks that you go to. But I never fell off my perch. I was always one of those guys. So I felt like I was on the right path. I didn't have to take any detours. I was going straight down the road. And later on, you run into obstacles. It's only natural because now you've reached the top of the pyramid. Only the creme de la creme go forward. And they've experienced the same things. They've been successful. They've been an all-star. They've been great. They've been the player of the year. They've been this and that, whatever. You're playing against players with similar success, similar confidence. And you have to learn how to beat that other person or be better than that other person. But growing up, I really enjoyed switching sports. I enjoyed going from one to the other. And of course, I was good enough to do it. If I hadn't been, may have changed some things. But I learned something from each sport that eventually crossed over and came to baseball. And in football, as an example, I learned how to use my leverage from my lower body, because everything you do in football is driving forward, blocking, tackling, you use your legs, whatever. So that gave me a good fundamental structure for my lower body. And then hitting, of course, is hand and eye coordination. And when you play basketball on defense, you're constantly moving your feet. Your footwork has to be very quick. So that certainly helped me play my position defensively. And in hitting, of course, with the hand and eye coordination and the lower body is just slightly split second ahead of your upper body because it has to have a foundation to set up on. It's like one of those bang, bang plays at first base, lower body, upper body. Your hand speed and everything else, it takes place to make it short and sweet. But I learned something from each sport. I really enjoyed the competition, learning the different ways of which the game is played and how you go about it. And I just had a really, really good time with it.
So kind of moving in another direction, years ago, I was very fortunate. I got to meet Tommy Lasorda at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. It was a special night. And in the encounter that night, I could tell he was extremely charismatic and clearly he could command a room. He did on that night. So after meeting him, I imagine that he would have been an amazing guy to play for. So managers and coaches, they have many different leadership styles. And throughout the sports world, there have been many successful coaches with very unique and different styles of leadership. So some examples, guys like Tommy Lasorda, of course, Phil Jackson, Bill Belichick, Bobby Knight, Tony La Russa, Herb Brooks. And I know recently you've had Mike Eruzione on your podcast, and I was at a conference once where Mike Eruzione spoke, and he went into how Herb Brooks was partly, if not most of the reason why they were so successful to the point where they got to the gold medal round and won the gold medal. However, they didn't like him very much. As you are sitting here at this point in your life and you think back to the coaches and leaders that you have, what do you think makes a great coach or leader? And what role does the belief that you're only as good as the people around you play into it?
Tom Lasorda knew how to entertain a room. He was a very hands-on manager, quite the opposite from the guy that I started with, another Hall of Fame manager, and Walter Alston, equally respected in opposite corners. Tommy was a motivator. He was a guy that instilled confidence. He became a father to, I think, the nucleus of our club, especially with the players that represented the infield, Davey Lopes, Russel, and myself. the longest running and most successful infield in Major League history, of which we have a shrine in Cooperstown for.
And will never be duplicated, I believe.
No, it won't. It's not to say that four players aren't capable of doing it. It's just the circumstances involved in getting there. Tommy, he had his boys, and we were his boys, and there were others. And he took us under his wing, and we did things together a lot. And we spent a great deal of time together away from the field. We took extra batting practice from Tommy, who threw the BP. He had us taking extra ground balls, extra fly balls. We worked harder than any other group or players in the camp. He fought for us in meetings to try and secure a fast climb to Major League Baseball. And we succeeded together. And I remember a time that every Sunday in Vero Beach, Florida, we were scheduled to be on television back to Los Angeles each and every Sunday for our exhibition game. And so we knew we were going to be at home in Dodgertown. And what we did after the game is we would go over to the local bowling alley, which had 4 lanes. And we had our group of guys over there, and we used to go bowl after the game. And we had teams, and we had the loser of this group pay for the bowling. And the team that won the top got the money in the pot. And the team in the middle had to pay for dinner, which was the worst part of everything, because these guys can eat. Okay. And we used to go over to the Holiday Inn, which was right across the street from another restaurant that we used to frequent. And Lasorda used to kid the owner of the Holiday Inn and the smorgasbord on Sundays that he said, before the spring training's over with, you're going to bronze these guys' silverware. So we had a really good time with it.
It sounds like Tommy Lasorda, along with his baseball knowledge and being charismatic, he prided himself on a chemistry and an atmosphere where there was camaraderie, which seems to be really important in your experience with him.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, we all owe him a debt of gratitude for the fact that he was dedicated to us. We were family. I mean, this elevation of Tommy after 4 years of being the third base coach for the Dodgers, the heir apparent to Walter's spot as manager, was the most logical choice. I mean, it was family back then. It was family back then because of the O'Malley family and the ownership. It's not corporate America. It wasn't corporate America. I'm not friendly with corporate America. I don't like the black and whiteness of it. Today's game is run by metrics, and people who supply that information are people who have no experience in baseball. And it seems like regardless of what business you're in today, it seems like the notification here is just like when Dave Roberts got hired to be the manager of the Dodgers, no experience necessary. Really? Well, I would like, if it's an office of importancy, and I probably made that word up, that I have a person that really understands fully what's going on.
So it sounds like you would be more about traditionalism than analytics.
Well, I think there's a fine mix now. You have to honor the data. I have no problems with the data. I think it's informational. It's helpful, but I don't think it's absolute. I think there are experiences that you have in a game where the numbers don't apply. And it's as simple as that. And to tell those people that means we don't know what we're talking about. And that's where I have a rift.
So as a baseball fan, I love the rivalry between the Dodgers and the Reds, especially when you played. And some would say it compares to the Yankees-Red Sox rivalry. For us fans, and I'm sure you know this, when our teams played the arch enemy, it's a big deal. So as a player, was that a real thing?
There was no better rivalry in baseball at the time. I can appreciate the Yankees and Red Sox wanting to chirp in there, but I think that our rivalry in the 70s, mid-70s, you can see that the National League West, where there were only 2 divisions back then, of which the Dodgers and the Reds resided, the 2 best teams in the National League, and I can argue 2 best teams in all of baseball during that period. For a period of about 9 years or so, the winner of the National League West was going to the World Series. That was the road. All due respect to the terrific teams that they had in the East, the Pirates, the Phillies, Montreal, all really, really great teams with some great players. But that's how it turned out. And yeah, there was an exception, 79, 80. Pittsburgh Philadelphia. The rest of the time, it's Dodgers, Reds. And the 55,000 screaming lunatic fans that we would walk into Cincinnati's Riverfront Stadium and be confronted with was pure joy. Okay. And I can tell you that we had the same thing waiting for them when they came to Dodger Stadium. It was not just another regular season game.
It doesn't get better than that. So let me ask you, we know and we've all heard that hitting a round ball with a round bat is one of the hardest things to do in all of sports. And I've heard it said that good Major League Baseball hitters, along with possessing incredible talent, that hand-eye coordination you talked about earlier, it must also be that you can anticipate the next pitch correctly. In other words, whether it's a slider or a fastball coming your way. Is there truth to that? You have to have both to be a good Major League Baseball player, that hand-eye coordination, that ability, plus you can anticipate the next pitch.
Well, anticipating the next pitch is based on eyesight. If you do the math, I believe there's 0.4 of a second for a ball to travel 60 feet, 6 inches to home plate. And in that period of time, you have that amount of time to recognize the pitch that comes out of his hand, decide whether you're going to swing or not, and execute it. And so, yeah, it's difficult. However, I would not want to try to block a guy in the NFL that weighs 350 pounds, 6 feet, 6 inches tall. That would not work out well.
That's hard too. I would agree on that. So you've had so many major highlights in your Major League Baseball career. You hit over 300 home runs. You won a World Series. You were World Series MVP, 6-time All-Star. Do you have a greatest memory?
Winning the World Championship was our ultimate goal. Played in 4 World Series. We were knocking on the door all the time. We had disappointments. Biggest one coming in 1978 when we pretty much, I thought, had this series under control until an interference call with Reggie Jackson in the 6th inning of Game 3 that changed the complexion of the entire series. And we fell into a funk right after that and lost. So that's my worst memory that I have in Major League Baseball. Everybody wants to be world champions. And when you become the MVP of all of that, then what else is there? And I am so thrilled that I was able to reach the crest of that mountain and to not only take the World Series championship trophy back to Los Angeles, but to be able to be an MVP in that series was, well, the cherry on the top. There were other great things that I was able to accomplish. I'm the highest ranked Los Angeles Dodger infielder all time by WAR. Of the 10 years that I played there, I was the number 1 ranked player 6 of those years. The other 4 years, Willie Crawford was once, Jimmy Wynn, Reggie Smith, and Pedro Guerrero. And to be atop of that list, to have the greatest month also in Dodger history, which came in April of 1977, metrically, whatever, it is the greatest month in Dodger history. I set a major league record for runs batted in that month with 29 in 20 games. And we had a 17-3 start to that year and pretty much catapulted us into a position of we're going to sit around and wait for the World Series 4 months early. So, yeah, there was some pluses and minuses to that year. It made us complacent a little bit. But I was fortunate to play in a great organization that had this great history and tradition, of which we were able to carve our own special history and tradition and carry that Dodger flag. And so I'm very grateful for the opportunity. It was a pleasure and honor to wear the Dodger uniform and to represent it in the way that we did. We made the O'Malley family proud. And we've had that conversation before because the halls of Vero Beach, if you had ever had the opportunity to visit there, was lined with Dodger history and tradition of all the great teams and players there. And so the fact is that I wanted to be that player. I wanted our stuff up there. And eventually that happened.
A few of my buddies and I have made it a goal to get to every Major League Baseball park in America. We're referred to as the Tour 4. We've hit all Major League Baseball parks, but just a few. And you've been able to call Dodger Stadium your home field. You've been able to call Wrigley Field your home field. And when my buddies and I were in Cincinnati, we actually bumped into Pete Rose. And he was in the mood to talk. And as we were talking, he was asking us what we were doing. And when we explained to him what our deal was, we asked him the same question I have for you. What Major League Baseball park would you recommend as the must-see or don't-miss park for baseball fans? And I think I know what your answer is going to be.
Well, Look, I'm prejudicial. I played in what I feel was the best ballpark in the world, in Dodger Stadium. And a lot of it has to do with our fan support. We were the first team in Major League history that took attendance over 3 million. I was very fortunate as a kid. I always wanted to get to Yankee Stadium. Yankee Stadium was a must. My first appearance in Yankee Stadium was actually as the starting third baseman in the 1977 All-Star game. And that was a big thrill. And then, of course, we went back and played in the World Series that same year. And I hit my first home run in game 2 of that series. Wrigley Field, one of the 3 standing longest running fields in baseball history, still there along with Boston and Dodger Stadium. So certainly glad that I had that opportunity. There were plenty of other stadiums that I was disappointed with. I thought they would be better than the clubhouses would be better than they actually were. But today's ballparks are streamlined. They are definitely fit for today's modern day player. They have enormous clubhouses. They have every amenity available to them. So they should feel very well taken care of in today's game.
Nowadays, if they don't have sushi at the park, it's a bad place,
Well, they have their own chef. They have their own kitchen. So pretty much the chef knows what everybody's specialties are. And there you have it.
You might be surprised. The Pete Rose response to that question was PNC Park in Pittsburgh. He just said he loved the atmosphere and he loved the skyline during a night game.
Well, yeah. The new ballpark in Pittsburgh is incredible. They tell me that might be the most beautiful park in America today. I have not seen it, but I have seen it on TV. And I got to tell you that the landscape there is really terrific.
So back to the Tour 4. So when we travel, we debate, baseball minutia for hours. If we're driving or flying, we're debating baseball. And there are a few things that I'm hoping you can settle for the 4 of us with a simple yes or no. And I'll mention the topic, and you could simply say yes or no, and back it up only if you want to or think you need to. So the first topic, yes or no, the shift.
Don't like it.
Okay. Pitch clock.
Like it.
The automated baseball strike system, the box.
Bad for umpires.
Pete Rose, should he be in the Hall of Fame?
He has all the credentials in the world to be in the Hall of Fame. Unfortunately, Pete made a serious mistake at the time. He violated the number 1 rule in baseball, which is like the Holy Grail. The people in Cooperstown have not been very sentimental towards what has happened since then. I mean, we even have gambling now in baseball. Then, of course, the steroid era, which I'm told that we have players that are in the Hall of Fame who used steroids. I don't care to really back that up with anything more than what I've been passed on. But yeah, Pete, take away that mistake. Pete's sitting there like everybody else.
You mentioned the steroid era players. So steroid era players in the Hall of Fame with an asterisk, yes or no?
Yes. I trust my information on that. I would say not many, but a few have crossed over.
I guess this would be the last question, Ron. And I heard you say that prior to writing your autobiography, Penguin Power, which is getting great reviews, you weren't sure if you had a story to tell. And based on our conversation today, you've obviously got an incredible story to tell. What was the turning point that informed you that, yes, in fact, you do have a great story to tell and you had to write that book?
Well, number 1, I was getting prodded for years. When are you going to do this? When are you going to do this? When are you going to do this? I don't know. I don't know if I want to. I don't know if I have a story to tell. I don't know if I want to have the rest of my life out there in a book form. All you have to do is Google me. You can find out enough about me. I didn't know if I wanted to have a book that had all this other stuff in there. And of course, with certain limitations in the book, I did not talk about Dodger ownership. I kept that strictly to the ownership of which I played as a Dodger, not as I was employed. So that's how I worked that. The rest of it was a matter of time. I was now not working for the club any longer. I'm now doing a podcast. I decided that through the prodding of one friend that finally pushed me over and dropping all these walls of, as an athlete, as a celebrity, which falls hand in hand, you have a lot of walls up. There's a lot of people trying to protect you from this, that, and whatever. So there's a little bit of hesitancy about it. And I finally decided that I do have the time. I do have a story to tell. I hope they like the story that I have to tell. It's meant to be pretty much a book about if you have a dream, follow it. You might end up achieving it. And there are a lot of people who've had those same thoughts, and they run into issues down the road in which you can't overcome them. Maybe it's a family issue where you have to go help now your family in need. There was the war back when Ted Williams played and lost 4 years of service to Major League Baseball. All kinds of things can divert your path, but I was fortunate to be able to stay on it and achieve it and explain the bumps and bruises that go along with it. It wasn't an easy trek. I just didn't walk through it. There were lots of different setbacks of different kinds. That is the part I think that baseball teaches you. You know, it's the only sport where you can fail 70% of the time in terms of your batting average, which is only a minor statistic in terms of today's metrics, that you can be successful and considered great in the 1 percentile. Think of it. If you were a salesman, if you failed 70% of the time selling your product, do you think you'd be selling that product much longer? I mean, so yeah, there were plenty of things. And you have to be resilient. You're going to fail most of the time. And you got to be able to say, I'm going to get back up and give this another shot.
Well, I think you have a great story to tell, and I'm very happy that you went through and wrote Penguin Power. And I'm more happy that you got to share some of your story with us today here at Harmony Talk and reminded us all to dream big and be reminded that dreamers can become doers. So I thank you for being with us, Ron, and I thank you for sharing your story. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
I have thoroughly enjoyed it, Greg. And yes, I was one of those guys, experienced all of that. And trust me, don't be afraid to follow that road. You be the determining factor as to whether or not you either move forward or stand back. But it can be achieved. If I can do it, there's plenty of people out there who can do it.
I've been talking with Ron Cey, husband, father, retired Major League Baseball player, author, podcaster. I encourage you to check out Ron's podcast, The Ron Cey Show, and please check out his book, an autobiography titled Penguin Power, a book about Dodger Blue, Hollywood Lights, and Ron's 1 in a million big league journey. This has been Harmony Talk by A.M. Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business started in 1920. I'm Greg Frigoletto. Thank you to Ron Cey for being with us today. To our listeners, continue to dream and keep doing.